Hi yoga friends. I'm here live on Facebook for Ask Me Anything Yoga. So I'm hanging out here in my office, which is also my practice space. I've got my handy dandy clipboard and my Sharpie. So if I need to, I can draw some yoga stick figures for you. I've got my tea. I'm all settled in. So if you have any questions about yoga, about practice, classes, teaching, if you're a yoga teacher, just go ahead and drop them in the comments and I will see them pop up magically on my screen and I will answer your questions for you. So I can catch you up on what's going on. I'm kind of winding down my classes for the summer and focusing on teaching workshops and teaching clients one-on-one is going to be my main jam over the summertime. So I offer one-on-one instruction in Catonsville in this lovely little wellness co-op, as well as in the magic of the internet via Skype. So you can visit my website, omchantress.com, for details about all of my private offerings, and what I do best is working one-on-one with people to help empower them to do their own practice. So that is my jam. I just want people to practice yoga, and I find the best way to help people do that is by talking to them. So I'm talking to you now. So I have prepared ahead a couple of questions that people sent me in advance, but if you have any questions, just go ahead and write them down in the comments and I'll be happy to chime in. So, over the past few weeks, I've worked a little bit one-on-one with people, and I've just had some conversations with people about yoga. And I would say, the bulk of my conversations about yoga recently can be summed up by this one statement, which is okay, so I've taken some yoga classes, but I can't really get into it. Help me. So a lot of times people will go to their doctor and have various complaints, and doctors will often say, you just need to calm yourself down. Your stress is just way too high. This is why you're having symptoms. Or for whatever reason, somebody will say, you should try yoga. And then you go to a yoga class and then it's not for me. But a lot of people still want to do yoga, even if they don't have a super amazing first experience in a yoga class. And so my response to that is, for one, yoga classes are generally extremely general. So even if a teacher has a lot of experience, and especially if it's a large class of 20 or 30 or even a dozen people in the room, you're probably, as a teacher, only going to get it right for on a really good day, 60% of the people it'll be tailored for exactly what their needs are. And so, if you go to a class and it's well, I didn't really stretch my shoulders the way that I wanted to, and the teacher was doing a low back class. So, it's not necessarily the teacher's fault. It's not that you picked the wrong class. It's just that one yoga class is just going to be so broad that it can't possibly address every single person's specific needs. So that's one thing. The other thing is that the yoga scene is really flooded with a lot of inexperienced teachers. And so it's possible that you go to a class and it's just you're not getting super expert instruction, and it could be the sequencing's not great, or the instructions aren't clear and you might not understand what's going on. And so that's just that's what's out there right now. And it's kind of it keeps kind of building on itself because people get into a yoga class, they're taking really general classes, and they're well, this is pretty good. I could do this. I could teach this kind of class. And then it just kind of keeps going. And even if, like I mentioned before, that's not always the case. You might have a really great yoga teacher, but still in a class situation, there's often not time or space for teachers to really get into the why of what you're doing in class. And so it could be a super great class, you could feel good afterwards, but you're like, okay, like, why did we do cobra and then downward facing dog? Why did we do warrior pose and then triangle pose? Like, there's not necessarily time for the teachers to explain or build into the class the progression of what's happening. And so you might not necessarily be able to recreate that experience on your own. And so this is where working one-on-one with a teacher is super helpful, so that it can really supplement what you're doing in class. So if you're working one-on-one with a teacher, you can understand why you might put one posture before or after another one. You can start to figure out which postures are going to be really helpful for you and which ones you can skip. You can just really start to figure out what's going to be ideal for you. So when you practice yoga in a class, most yoga classes these days are an hour to an hour and a half long, depends on what kind of class you go to. But if you get like a really specific yoga practice, it can be like you only have to do it for 20 or 30 minutes, which is really awesome. And you're also saving the time of going and driving to the gym and taking a shower or whatever. So it can be really efficient to figure out how to do your own yoga practice. So that is some of the benefits of working one-on-one. Hi, Lucy. So Lucy's asking, what are the best tools you use for planning sequences? Do you have a paper plan written out, or do you use some sort of app? I draw stick figures. So hang on a second, and I have some handy. Okay. So I just taught a workshop about how to do a home yoga practice. And so even though I was just busting on really general practices, for that workshop, I did make a really general practice. And so, this is backwards. Sorry. But you can see the stick figures, and there are written notes, which are backwards right now. And there are inhale and exhale cues with arrows, so I can note, like, you exhale and go to child's pose, and you inhale, come back up to hands and knees. So this gives me all the information I need very quickly. And this says 3 times, so you would repeat this 3 times, and then you would stay for 3 breaths. It was really helpful for me to figure out a system for drawing stick figures. I learned it from 2 of my teachers, from Eric Schiffman, and then later with a little bit more detail from Gary Kraftstow, who's the founder of Vinny Yoga. Or I guess he's not the founder of Vinny Yoga, but he's, I guess, the head of the American Vinny Yoga Institute. So Vinny Yoga, anyway, let's not get into that. So I learned how to draw stick figures from those teachers, and I think both of them got those from Jessica Char, is both of their teachers, and he's also an engineer, and I think that is like some engineering that went into the creation of yoga stick figures. So that's how I do it. And you can see also I make like this 2-column situation. I think I might make a separate video just about writing down sequences like this, because it is, a lot of people have this question. And then the how to plan sequences, that is a science all of its own. So the big understanding of making intelligent sequences, that also comes from my Vinny Yoga training. And so there are all kinds of guidelines about how to make an effective sequence. How do you counterpose things? What is a logical progression for a class? within Vini Yoga, there's a whole bunch of ideas about sequencing that has been super helpful for me, and that allows me to create things really quickly because I understand how to use those tools. The other advice I might have, another resource if you want to get into that, there is a little bit of that in Desikachar's Heart of Yoga. So he gives some ideas about how to progress through a class. But if you have any other questions about sequencing, let me know and I can talk with you more about that. I think one of the challenges about sequencing is that it's not something that's always taught super clearly in yoga teacher trainings. I think people are often given like just one outline on how to do things, and don't necessarily understand how to create things on their own. So yeah, that's another thing I might be able to make another more in-depth video about. That's a good question. I love sequencing and drawing stick figures. I'm a little bit obsessed with stick figures. They're really helpful for students too. If you can teach your students how to read them, then people will really appreciate having notes. Oh yeah, I have that. I think I have Mark Stevens' teaching book. I don't have his sequencing book though, but that's a good one too. Yeah, and I think that's one of those things that also comes from experience. Once you know, for example, if you're working with Mark Stevens' ideas with sequencing, if you start using them in your own practice and start teaching them to students, then you'll get into, like, you'll in time get a feeling of what makes sense. Yeah. Cool. Yay, that seems like a good book. Uh-oh, I lost my notes. Hang on a second. Okay. So, oh yeah, this is an interesting question that came up actually in the comments of my last video, and I thought I would mention it again because I think it was a really good question about my thoughts about chair yoga and yoga for older folks. And the person that asked this question had was also like, well, you know, is this like a legit practice, or do I have objections about slicing and dicing and just using pieces of yoga versus teaching things in depth? And so this is like I have lots of opinions. So for one, chair yoga and yoga for older people are like two different things. They sometimes intersect where older people might have to use chairs, but you might be a young person that has to use a chair. They're not necessarily the same. They're two different groups. And so you might use chairs in different ways depending on who you're teaching. I don't have an objection about slicing and dicing up the practice, because that is your job as a yoga teacher, is to see who you're working with and to adapt the practice to suit their needs. And so, you know, doing a really sweaty vinyasa practice with lots of sun salutations, that's just not going to be appropriate for everybody. And so it is, you know, it's more difficult to teach a class like that where you might have to make adaptations for things or change things, teach things in a way they're different than you do them or than the way you learned how to do them or whatever. So I would say, like, that's an advanced practice to teach people who might have to use a chair, and you're not someone that uses a chair. So I think my frustration is more than like the slicing and dicing of stuff is the dumbing down of yoga practice for people that might have to make modifications. And so like that, like dumbing a practice down, that is really frustrating to me. Like, oh, you might hurt yourself, or, oh, this might be too hard for you, so we'll just do it this way instead. Like, I don't know. There's something like really icky about that. And so, you know, chairs are tools. Using different kinds of postures are tools to use, and that makes a practice more effective, and it doesn't make it worse or like not as cool as another kind of yoga practice. So that really frustrates me when teachers kind of baby students or dumb things down. And I think maybe that is part of what makes like chair yoga or gentle yoga or yoga for older people seem like it's just like, oh, not cool, because I don't know. There's just, I think it's cool. It's cool to use a chair. So what is your comment? I can't see the whole thing. Oh my gosh. I was at my college reunion this weekend and had to rant about my teacher training cohort about how the teacher they brought in totally did not make modifications despite the fact the class is mostly 7-year-olds. Yeah, that does happen. But also, like, I know some people that are older that can still do a lot of things, but you should definitely see who's in the room, what they're able to do, and be able to adapt things to make things work for people. Whew, yeah. And then a friend of mine asked me my opinion about the yoga float. And I had to ask what that was, because I'm like, what's a yoga float? But to clarify, the yoga float is, I think, the, you know, if you're in a vinyasa kind of practice, a flowing practice, where there are jumping back to a low plank, or jumping from downward facing dog to a standing forward bend, instead of hopping your way or stepping your way into any of those positions to like do the Jedi float forward and back. I wish I had a stronger opinion about this, but I'm like, that's a thing. I mean, it's one of those like fancy yoga tricks, like handstands, I think, are another fancy yoga trick. Where, yeah, I mean, you will build a lot of strength by working towards being able to do that. And for some people, like, your proportions are going to make it easier for you to do those things. But I would put, like, the yoga float in the same category as yoga choreography, yoga aesthetics. So, like, the Instagram yogis, and like the performative aspect of yoga classes. And so I think, you know, there is this thing in vinyasa classes where it's like, how crazy can I make it? Like, how interesting can I make these transitions? And I feel like the yoga float thing is part of that. It adds like a flair, an aesthetic flair to your yoga practice. But I'm like, I don't know. Like, I've done a bunch of vinyasa classes. I taught vinyasa for a long time. But I'm also probably, like, the laziest vinyasa practitioner. I'm like, I really don't care about learning those things, so I don't know. If you can do that float, like, you do you. That's cool. Yeah, so if you got any more questions, you can pop them in the comments. I usually have, like, a strong yoga opinion about just about everything, but the yoga float, I'm just like, yeah, whatever, it's fine. And then, so yoga is like this huge, big practice, right? There is a whole bunch of different styles and approaches and whatever. And a lot of times people ask me, like, what's the best yoga pose, or, what are some yoga poses that I could do every day? And so my top 3 yoga poses, for doing, like, on the regular: simple back bend, so laying on your belly and lifting your chest and or your legs off the floor, Shalambhasana or Bhujangasana are the Sanskrit names for those, like prone back bends, basically. Lay on your belly, do a back bend. There's like a million variations of those. They're all good for you. my teacher Gary Craftsell says that it's like flossing for your spine, so you should also floss your spine every day, just like you floss your teeth every day. Number 2 is a simple forward bend, and so you did a back bend, simple forward bend. So you can lay on your back and hug in your knees to your chest. You can go from hands and knees, heels on your hips, to child's pose, standing forward bend, like a simple one. It's helpful to go in and out a couple times and then stay a few times with any of these postures. So a little bit of in and out, a little bit of dynamic movement will make it easier to stay and stretch a little bit longer. And then the third one would be a supine twist. So lay on your back, knees to chest, twist. That one is a really simple one, and it can do a lot of good things for you. So most people find it feels really good on your back somewhere, so it can help stretch the muscles in the sides of the back, as well as the front of the chest and shoulders, the outer hip. So it's a good one. It gets a lot of stuck spots that are usually sore for people. So those are my top 3. Simple back bend, simple forward bend, supine twist, if you want to do a little yoga every day. If you do those 3, it'll take you maybe 10 minutes. It could take you as few as like 4 minutes to do those. Yeah. So, I don't know, that's about all I got. If you have any more questions or if you want to say hey, thanks for watching. So, try to do this once a month. So if you're watching this on the replay, you can put your questions below and I will get to them next time. So what I do is much of what we're doing right now. I work one-on-one with people to help develop simple and effective yoga practices. Maybe not quite as short as 3 postures long, maybe, 10 posture long practice is usually what I give people. And I also started doing mentoring sessions one-on-one for yoga teachers. So if you are a new yoga teacher and you feel like maybe you're in the yoga world now and you need to have some questions about what comes up in your classes, I can help you navigate that. I taught in a big fitness club for 8 years, and there's